My name is Captain Julia Stone, an officer in United States Army Intelligence. At 30 years old, I was trained to face the enemy anywhere in the world. But I was never prepared to face the enemy within my own family. I will never forget the feel of the cold asphalt on my cheek, the acrid smell of gasoline and burnt metal filling my lungs after my car exploded. In the heart of the fiery wreckage, something caught my eye: the familiar leather jacket of my stepbrother, Ethan. Hours later, in the hospital, Major Collins of the CID looked at me with a dismissive gaze. "Captain, perhaps you're just under a lot of stress." He didn't even bother to write down my statement. They thought an explosion and a few words of psychological intimidation could silence me. They gravely underestimated a daughter of Colonel Stone. Let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe if you've ever been dismissed and pushed down by the very people you were supposed to trust the most. The darkness along County Line Road was absolute, a thick, rural blackness that swallowed the high beams of my Chevy sedan just 50 feet ahead. It was well past midnight, the end of a grueling 16-hour shift at Fort Bragg, and every bone in my body ached with a deep, satisfying exhaustion. My world had shrunk to this 2-lane ribbon of asphalt cutting through the North Carolina pines, the steady hum of the engine, and the voice of Ronnie Van Zant coming through the speakers. Mama told me, when I was young, "Come sit beside me, my only son." The familiar opening chords of "Simple Man" always brought my father to mind, Colonel Michael Stone. A man who was more of a legend than a father, a figure carved from granite and Army regulations. He wasn't a warm man, but he was a just one. He'd play this song on his old record player in his study, the scent of leather and old books in the air, and tell me, "Julia, it's not about being the smartest or the strongest. It's about being a person of your word. That's the only legacy that matters." His legacy was honor, a compass I had sworn to live by. All I wanted was my bed. A few hours of dreamless sleep before the cycle started all over again. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee from the travel mug in the console, the bitter taste doing little to sharpen my senses. That's when I heard it. Click. Click clack. It wasn't the sound of a rock kicked up from the road. It was a dry metallic sound coming from underneath the chassis. It was deliberate, rhythmic. My entire body went rigid. Every ounce of fatigue vanished, replaced by the ice-cold adrenaline of pure training. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. My eyes scanned the empty road ahead, the dense tree line on either side. My mind, the intelligence officer's mind, started running threat assessments. This wasn't a mechanical failure, this was a trap. I didn't slam the brakes. I eased my foot onto the pedal, smoothly guiding the car to the gravel shoulder, letting it roll to a stop under a large oak tree. I killed the engine and the headlights, plunging myself into near-total darkness. Silence descended, thick and heavy. For a moment, the only sound was my own heart hammering against my ribs. I took one deep, controlled breath, my hand moving to the door handle. The moment my fingers closed around the cold plastic, my training screamed one last warning. Get out, now. The instant I pushed the door open, the world didn't just explode, it was unmade. First came the pressure wave, a silent, violent fist that slammed into my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. Then came the sound, a deafening, gut-wrenching roar that felt like it tore the sky apart. The world flashed a brilliant, searing white. I was lifted, thrown through the air like a rag doll, every nerve ending screaming in protest. I landed hard on the asphalt shoulder, the rough surface scraping my cheek raw. The ringing in my ears was so loud it was its own form of silence. Heat, intense and suffocating, washed over me, and the air was instantly choked with the sickeningly sweet smell of gasoline and the acrid stench of burning metal and plastic. Pain was a symphony, a sharp, piercing agony in my shoulder, a dull, throbbing fire along my back. My vision swam, flickering between the black sky and the monstrous orange blossom of fire that had been my car. Through the haze of shock, my training fought to the surface. Observe, assess, report. And then I saw it. There, just at the edge of the inferno, illuminated by the pulsating flames, was a shape. a piece of clothing. It wasn't just any piece of clothing, it was a worn, brown leather jacket, the collar frayed, a familiar tear on the left sleeve. It was Ethan's, my stepbrother's jacket, the exact one he'd been wearing just 2 days ago when he'd stopped by my apartment, all smiles and false concern. The image burned itself onto my retina, a brand of pure horror. It wasn't just a clue. It was an answer to a question I hadn't even known to ask. The physical agony searing my body was nothing compared to the icy shock that flooded my soul. The enemy wasn't in some distant land. He had just been in my home. He shared my father's name. Then the roaring flames and the weight of that betrayal finally pulled me under into darkness. I woke to the sterile, antiseptic smell of a hospital, Womack Army Medical Center. Every muscle felt bruised, every joint screamed when I tried to move. A dull, persistent ache throbbed behind my eyes. A man was sitting in the chair beside my bed, his large frame making the small space feel even more cramped. His Class A uniform was immaculate. Major Collins from the Criminal Investigation Division. He had a solid, imposing build, but his eyes were strangely vacant, like two polished stones. He listened as I recounted the events, my voice hoarse and weak. I told him about the clicking sound, my training, the deliberate nature of it all. When I got to the jacket, his eyebrow twitched with what looked like impatience. "Captain," he interrupted, his voice smooth and utterly devoid of empathy. "The preliminary report from the EOD team suggests engine failure. A faulty fuel line, there was no sign of explosive residue." "That's not possible, Major," I insisted, trying to sit up, a fresh wave of pain making me gasp. "I saw my stepbrother's jacket. It was at the scene." Collins offered a small, patronizing smile. "You've experienced a major trauma, Captain Stone, a significant concussion. The mind can play tricks on you in these situations. It fills in the blanks." He leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting to that of a doctor speaking to a confused patient. "Maybe you should just focus on resting. We can talk more when you're feeling more stable." He was reading me as a casualty, not as a witness. As a woman on the verge of hysteria, not a fellow officer. He didn't take a single note. When he left, the silence he left behind was heavier than before. I lay there, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling, the beeping of the heart monitor, a steady rhythm counting out my isolation. In that sterile, white room, two truths crystallized in my mind with terrifying clarity. First, there was a cover-up in progress, and Collins was a part of it. Second, no one was coming to fight for me. I was utterly and completely alone. The physical pain began to recede, overshadowed by a cold, sharp-edged rage. It wasn't a hot, blinding anger, but a focused, chilling resolve. I am a United States Army intelligence officer. I was trained to find truth in a fog of lies, to see patterns in chaos. They thought a car bomb and some condescending words could break me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My greatest war hadn't started in the deserts of the Middle East. It had just begun, right here at home. I turned my head on the starchy pillow, looking out the window at the distant lights of Fayetteville. The image of that leather jacket, silhouetted against the flames, filled my mind. Why? Why would it be Ethan? Where did everything go so wrong? Lying in that sterile hospital room, the only sound the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the question echoed in the quiet spaces of my mind. Why Ethan? Where did everything go so wrong? The answer wasn't a single event, but a slow poisoning, a history written in small slights and quiet dismissals that began long before the explosion. My memories of the time before them are warm, but faded, like old photographs left in the sun. I remember the smell of my mother's baking, cinnamon and apples, and the sound of her laughter filling our small house just outside Fort Bragg. After she was gone, a sudden, brutal cancer stealing her from us, the house didn't just get quiet, it got cold. The warmth had left with her. My father, Colonel Stone, was a good man, but he was a soldier, lost in his grief and unprepared to be the sole anchor for a 10-year-old girl. 2 years later, Margaret and her son, Ethan, arrived. She was a whirlwind of bright lipstick and forced cheerfulness. Ethan, a year older than me, was sullen and watchful. I truly did. I tried to see them as a new beginning, a way to fill the echoing silence. But I quickly learned that I wasn't gaining a family. I was being displaced within my own home. The shift was subtle at first, then painfully obvious. At the dinner table, Margaret would steer the conversation to her first husband, Ethan's father, speaking of him in hushed, reverent tones as a fallen hero. Stories of my mother, the pictures of her on the mantelpiece, began to slowly disappear. Dinner itself became a nightly performance of favoritism. The main course might be for everyone, but dessert was always for Ethan. Peach cobbler, his favorite, would be brought out warm from the oven, the sweet smell filling the room. Margaret would heap a generous portion onto his plate, topping it with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, while I was offered a polite, but clearly secondary, slice. My father, bless his heart, seemed oblivious, just grateful that there was a woman in the house again, that the meals were warm and on time. He didn't see his daughter slowly fading into the wallpaper. As we grew older, the lines were drawn more sharply. We were two different species living under one roof. I poured myself into everything my father valued: discipline, academics, athletics. I was captain of the soccer team, a straight A student, my sights set firmly on West Point. I wanted to earn his pride, to live up to the Stone name. Ethan, meanwhile, drifted. He flunked out of community college twice, bounced between dead-end jobs, and excelled at only one thing: crafting elaborate excuses for his failures. The world was always against him. Someone else was always to blame. The night I received my acceptance letter from West Point, a full scholarship, I felt a surge of triumph so pure it almost made me dizzy. For one shining moment, I thought, this is it. This, he will see. My father insisted we celebrate. Margaret prepared a special dinner, pot roast and mashed potatoes, but the celebration quickly soured. Just before we sat down, Ethan announced he'd been fired from his job at the auto parts store. Instantly, the entire evening pivoted. My acceptance letter lay forgotten on the counter. The dinner became an impromptu therapy session for Ethan. Margaret fussed over him, her voice dripping with sympathy. "Oh, honey, that manager never appreciated you." My father sighed, running a hand over his face, his expression one of weary disappointment. Not with Ethan, but with the world that kept being so unfair to his stepson. Later that evening, as I was clearing the dishes, Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of stern reproach. "Julia," she said, her voice low, "you don't need to flaunt your achievements like that. Think about your brother's feelings." The words landed like a physical blow. It was the first time I understood the twisted logic of our home. My success wasn't a cause for celebration. It was a burden, an insult to Ethan's fragility. From that day on, I learned to keep my victories to myself. The ultimate theft occurred the year my father died. A sudden heart attack took the kernel from us, leaving a void that felt as vast and final as the sky. The funeral was a formal military affair, precise and heavy with tradition. The sharp crack of the 21-gun salute, the mournful notes of taps hanging in the humid air. At the end, an honor guard meticulously folded the American flag that had draped his casket into a tight, perfect triangle and presented it to Margaret. I stood beside her, my heart aching, waiting for her to pass it to me, his only biological child. It was my right. It was his legacy. Instead, she turned and placed it firmly in Ethan's hands. In front of everyone, his fellow officers, our friends, our family, she announced, "Your father would have wanted his son to have this." The lie was so audacious, so public, it left me breathless. Ethan accepted it without a flicker of shame, clutching it to his chest as if he'd earned it. In the weeks that followed, he began his conquest. He methodically went through my father's study, the one place that had always been my sanctuary. He took the ceremonial M1 Garand from the wall, the challenge coins from a dozen different units, the photograph of my father with General Schwarzkopf. He acted not just as the heir, but as the sole inheritor, and Margaret sanctioned his every move. I was watching my father's legacy, my legacy, being dismantled and stolen right before my eyes. The final warning sign, the one I truly failed to heed, came just before I left for basic training. I discovered Ethan was involved in some shady online business, racking up significant debt. I tried to warn my father, he just waved it away. You're too hard on him, Julia. He's just trying to find his own way. After Dad was gone, I brought my concerns to Margaret. Her face hardened, her eyes flashing with fury. How dare you spread lies about your brother? Are you that jealous of him? That blind, suffocating defense had nurtured a monster. And lying there in that hospital bed, the memory of her furious face as vivid as the pain in my shoulder, I finally understood. Long before the explosion, the lines had been drawn, the sides had been chosen, and I was not on theirs. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, if you've ever had your successes downplayed to protect someone else's feelings, please hit the like button for every quiet victory they never acknowledged. And in the comments, just type a simple, "I see you." Because sometimes that's all we ever needed to hear. My eyes drifted back to the hospital window. The past wasn't just a memory, it was a map, charting a direct course from those poisoned family dinners to the fiery wreckage on County Line Road. But my journey wasn't over. I had to go back even further to the one moment that should have been the pinnacle of my life. Even in my proudest moment, I was still just a shadow. The drive back to my off-base apartment was a blur of humiliation. A week out of the hospital, my body still a roadmap of aches and purple bruises, I had hoped to reclaim some small piece of my life. I'd planned to go to my office, use my security clearance, and start digging. Information was my weapon, my territory. But they had been waiting for me. I was stopped before I even reached my desk. Major Collins stood there, his posture rigid, flanked by two stone-faced military police officers. Their presence was overkill, a piece of theater designed for maximum effect. "Captain Stone," Collins said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a man reading a weather report. "By order of battalion command, you are being placed on indefinite administrative leave, effective immediately. We have concerns for your mental well-being following the accident." He emphasized the word accident, letting it hang in the air like a verdict. One of the MPs, a young sergeant who wouldn't meet my eyes, stepped forward and held out his hand. I didn't need to be told. I unclipped my common access card from my belt. I removed the gold oak leaf insignia from my collar. Each action felt like I was surrendering a piece of myself. They were stripping me of my identity in the middle of my own unit, in full view of my colleagues who now stared, pretending to be busy with paperwork. It was a public execution of my career, a clear message to everyone watching. She is no longer one of us. My apartment, once my sanctuary from the rigid structure of military life, transformed overnight into a prison. The four walls seemed to close in on me, the silence amplifying the frantic thoughts racing through my head. I paced the length of the living room, from the window overlooking the parking lot to the kitchen and back, a caged animal wearing a path in the cheap carpet. Every official door had been slammed shut in my face. My work email was deactivated. My calls to colleagues went to voicemail, unanswered. I was an island, completely cut off from the world I dedicated my life to. The paranoia began to creep in, a slow, insidious vine. Was that nondescript sedan that was always parked across the street new? Was the faint crackle on my phone line just static, or something more? Every creak of the floorboards in the apartment above, every footstep in the hallway, sent a jolt of alarm through me. This isolation wasn't just a consequence, it was a strategy. It was designed to break me, to suffocate my will until I accepted the neat, tidy narrative they had written for me. The story of the unstable female officer who cracked under pressure. And in my weakest moments, a terrifying question began to whisper in the back of my mind. What if they're right? What if I did just imagine it all? The seed of doubt Collins had planted was beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of my isolation. I would stand in front of my closet, staring at my Army service uniform hanging there, crisp and perfect. The polished brass, the colorful ribbons representing years of service and sacrifice. It all felt like a costume from another life, a uniform belonging to someone else. It was mocking me. The psychological assault escalated a few days later. A knock on the door, polite but firm. Through the peephole, I saw a young captain in a crisp uniform. He introduced himself as being from the Combat Stress Control Team, sent to check in on me. He had kind eyes and a gentle voice, which made his mission all the more sinister. He sat on my sofa, a notepad on his knee, and began his gentle interrogation. "Do you often feel anxious, Captain?" he asked. "Are you experiencing nightmares about the explosion? Have you felt disconnected from those around you?" They were leading questions, expertly crafted to build a medical file, a fraudulent file that would paint me as a classic case of PTSD, an unreliable witness plagued by trauma-induced hallucinations. It was a trap, and I knew it. I gave him clipped, one-word answers, my posture rigid with defiance. But as he continued his soft-spoken probing, a wave of despair washed over me. The very system I'd sworn an oath to defend, the institution built on a bedrock of honor and integrity, was now using the tools designed to help soldiers as weapons to destroy one of its own. That night, sleep was a forgotten country. I sat in the dark, the blue light of my laptop screen illuminating my face, scrolling endlessly through the meaningless chatter of the internet. It was a desperate search for distraction, for anything to silence the screaming in my own head. My thumb flicked across the trackpad, and I found myself on YouTube, watching an old TED Talk I'd seen years ago. It was the researcher Brené Brown. She was talking about a speech by Theodore Roosevelt, the man in the arena. The words on the screen felt like they were being projected directly into my soul. "It is not the critic who counts," she quoted, her voice filled with passion. "The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." Something inside me shifted, a jolt, like a circuit being reconnected after a power failure. The self-doubt, the fear, the suffocating helplessness, it all receded, replaced by a single, powerful realization. I am in the arena. This is the fight of my life. My face is marred by the literal asphalt of County Line Road. I cannot sit here in the dark, waiting for the system to either absolve me or condemn me. I cannot let them write my story. I have to fight back. I wasn't a patient. I wasn't a victim. I was a soldier. And a soldier's duty is to fight. My fingers flew across the keyboard, no longer aimless. I searched for a name, a number I hadn't dialed in years but had never forgotten. A name from my West Point days. A woman who saw the world in code and data streams. A digital ghost who could walk through firewalls without getting burned. My best friend, my sister in arms, Nora. My hand was steady as I picked up the phone. This call would change everything. They had isolated me, but they had forgotten about the alliances forged in the crucible of cadet life. They had chained me with regulations and procedures, but they were about to find out what happens when an intelligence officer decides to go off the books. My finger hovered over Nora's contact information, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It felt like the biggest risk I could take. After being betrayed by my family and gaslighted by the system, trusting anyone felt like an act of insanity. I was terrified that she, my brilliant, pragmatic, no-nonsense best friend, would be the final person to tell me I was crazy. But the words of Brené Brown echoed in my head. Show up, let yourself be seen. I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice, then a familiar, rapid-fire voice cut through the silence. "Stone, it's after midnight. This better not be you trying to get me to go for a beer at Patty's Pub in Fayetteville." A shaky laugh escaped my lips. "Not tonight, Nora." I took a deep breath, the kind you take before you step off a cliff, and the story poured out of me. It wasn't a structured intelligence report. It was a desperate, jumbled torrent of words. The explosion, the smell of burnt metal, the impossible sight of Ethan's leather jacket, Major Collins's condescending smile, the forced administrative leave, the psychological evaluation. I didn't stop, didn't pause for breath, terrified that if I did, my courage would fail me and the words would get stuck in my throat forever. When I finally finished, the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. My stomach twisted into a knot. This was a mistake, I thought. She thinks I've lost it. Then Nora's voice came back, and it was the clearest, most solid thing I'd heard in weeks. Listen to me, Jay, she said, her tone devoid of any doubt. It was the voice of an operator, a problem solver. They made one fatal mistake. They messed with the two top graduates of our West Point class. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed welled in my eyes. She believed me. Send me everything you have, she commanded. Every detail. Leave nothing out. For the next 48 hours, Nora went dark. I knew she was working, moving through the digital world like a phantom. She was stationed at Fort Gordon in Georgia, the Army's cyber warfare hub. But she operated in a space that had no geography. She used secure networks, back channels, and skills that were technically outside her job description but were second nature to her. I spent the time in a state of suspended animation, caught between hope and dread. The call came on the third day, through an encrypted messaging app. I have good news and bad news, Nora's voice said, crisp and clear. Give me the good news first. I need it. The good news is, you're not crazy, she said. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The bad news is, this is much worse than you think, she explained. Someone had flagged my security file with the tag, Alpha 7. It was a high-level counterintelligence marker, usually reserved for internal threats, spies, or assets being monitored for treason. It gave them carte blanche to track my entire digital footprint. They're reading your emails, Jay, she said, her voice grim. They're logging your web history, tracking your cell phone's location. You've been operating under total surveillance since the day after the explosion. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. They weren't just ignoring my claims, they were actively building a case against me. Now we fight back, Nora said, and I could hear the familiar click of her keyboard. Let's start with your esteemed stepbrother, Meridian Tactical. Guided by Nora, I plunged into the world of open-source intelligence, or OSINT. It was a world I knew well, but I had never been the target before. We started with public records, peeling back the layers of Ethan's so-called consulting firm. What we found was a classic Russian nesting doll of deception. Meridian Tactical's address was just a P.O. box in Wilmington. Its parent company, registered in Delaware, was a shell. That company was paid by another consulting firm with no employees, which in turn received massive, vaguely described payments from a major defense contractor. Then Nora found the money trail. Following a complex web of transactions, she located the final destination, a private account in the Cayman Islands, an account belonging to one Ethan Vance. The transfer notes were laughably arrogant. Special project expenses. This is classic money laundering, Jay, Nora said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. He's not just a failed community college student anymore. He's skimming millions off of defense contracts. He wasn't just trying to get rid of you, he was silencing a potential witness. It was a motive, solid and ugly. But then Nora found something else, something that made the blood run cold in my veins. While probing the firewalls of Meridian Tactical's servers, she found a back door, a hidden digital tunnel. It created a direct, untraceable link to a server cluster inside the Department of Defense network, a server located right here at Fort Bragg. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Nora's voice dropped to a near whisper. Jay, this isn't a joke. Ethan is not acting alone. He has an inside man. Someone with the authority to set up this connection, to flag your file with an Alpha 7. It could be Collins, or it could be someone much, much higher up the chain of command. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. From this moment on, you trust no one. You speak to no one. You are officially operating in enemy territory. An email notification pinged softly on my laptop. It was from a heavily encrypted address I didn't recognize. The subject line was just 5 words. They're watching you, Jay. Be careful. Inside was a single attachment, a screenshot of my own security file, the red Alpha 7 flag glowing like a malevolent eye, and a short message from Nora. Whoever's doing this has high-level access. We need physical proof, something they can't delete. The truth was now horrifyingly clear. The enemy wasn't just my family, he was in my army. And to get the proof I needed, I had to do the one thing I was dreading most. I had to go back home. I had to walk back into the tiger's den. The 2-hour drive to Wilmington felt like a tactical insertion into enemy territory. My objective was clear: retrieve physical evidence. My cover story was plausible. The repentant daughter seeking to make peace and talk things through. But beneath the calm exterior of a trained intelligence officer, the heart of a daughter was quietly breaking. I was about to use the language of family, reconciliation, forgiveness, as a weapon. A part of me felt sickened by it. Another part knew I had no other choice. Margaret opened the door, her smile as brittle as spun sugar. "Julia, darling, what a surprise!" She pulled me into a stiff, airless hug that smelled faintly of hairspray and Chanel No. 5. My father appeared behind her, his face a mask of strained neutrality. He couldn't meet my eyes. The performance had begun. Dinner was a masterclass in Southern passive aggression. Margaret had prepared all the comforting staples of my childhood: crispy fried chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, green bean casserole topped with fried onions. It was a meal designed to say, "We are a normal, loving family." But the food tasted like ash in my mouth. The air in the dining room was thick with unspoken words, a tension so palpable you could cut it with a knife. Margaret filled the silence with a breathless monologue about Ethan's latest ventures. He wasn't there, conveniently away on a business trip. "He's working so hard, Julia," she gushed, passing me the gravy boat. "He's in talks with some very important people in D.C. He's so determined to build on your father's legacy." Every word was a tiny poisoned dart, aimed directly at me. I was the one in the colonel's uniform, but Ethan, the drifter and the failure, was being lauded as the true heir. I just nodded, pushing the potatoes around on my plate, playing the part of the attentive daughter. After the dishes were cleared, we moved to the living room. This was it. I sat in the armchair across from them, the same chair my mother used to sit in. "I need to talk about Ethan," I began, my voice even and calm. Margaret's demeanor changed instantly. The warm hostess vanished, replaced by a defensive lioness. "Oh, here we go again," she snapped, her voice sharp. "Can't you just leave your brother alone? Hasn't he been through enough?" "He tried to kill me, Margaret." I said the words plainly, without heat, letting them land in the quiet room. "That is a vicious, horrible lie," she shot back. I turned to my father. He was staring at his hands, twisting a linen napkin into a mangled knot. He wouldn't look at me. "Dad," I pleaded, my voice softer now. "Nora and I found things. His company, Meridian Tactical, it's a front. He's laundering money." My father finally looked up, his eyes filled not with anger or disbelief, but with a profound, soul-deep weariness. "Julia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe you should just let CID handle this. Don't stir things up anymore. For the family." For the family. The phrase wasn't a plea, it was a cage. A gilded cage they used to trap me, to demand my silence in the name of a unity that had never truly existed. In that moment, watching the man I had revered my entire life choose willful ignorance over his own daughter, I knew that talking was pointless. My father, the colonel, a man who had faced down enemies on the battlefield, was a coward in his own home. "You're right," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "I'm tired. I think I'll just go up to my old room and rest." Margaret looked relieved. My father just nodded, his gaze dropping back to his tormented hands. I waited until the house fell into the deep silence of the suburbs after midnight. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Slipping out of bed, I moved through the darkened house with the practiced stealth of a soldier. Ethan's office, which used to be a spare bedroom, was at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked. The room was a reflection of his mind, chaotic and cluttered. Piles of papers, discarded tech gadgets, and empty energy drink cans littered every surface. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet. I started a systematic search, my training kicking in. I checked under the desk, behind the bookshelf, through the stacks of invoices. Nothing. Then I saw it. A stack of old tech magazines on the floor, slightly askew, covering a loose floorboard. My breath caught. I knelt, pried the board up with my fingertips, and reached into the dark space beneath. My fingers brushed against a small rectangular object. I pulled it out. A small black USB flash drive. My intelligence instincts screamed. This was it. This was what I came for. Working quickly, I plugged the drive into a small, encrypted duplicator I had brought with me. The device was silent, its small LED screen displaying the progress. It felt like an eternity. 10%, 45%, 80%, finally, 100%, copy complete. I ejected the original drive, placed it exactly where I had found it, and replaced the floorboard, carefully arranging the magazines on top. I was a ghost. I had never been there. The next morning, as I was preparing to leave, Margaret found me in the kitchen. She had a smug, victorious look on her face. "I'm glad you came to your senses," she said. I turned to face her, my car keys in my hand. "I know what Ethan did," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. A cruel, mocking laugh escaped her lips. "Oh, you poor, pathetic girl. Always so jealous." She took a step closer, her eyes glittering with a malice I had never seen so clearly before. "You should know, Julia, that in your father's eyes and in mine, Ethan has always been the real child of this house. You're just a soldier, a visitor passing through." The words were meant to shatter me, and they did. They severed the final, frayed thread of hope I had clung to for 20 years, but they also set me free. I didn't say another word. I just looked at her, letting her see the emptiness her words had created. Then I turned and walked out the front door, not looking back. I had what I came for, but the price was the final, undeniable confirmation that I was, and always had been, an orphan in my own home. Driving away from Wilmington, the copied USB drive felt heavy in my hand. I didn't feel victorious, just empty. I had lost them for good. All that was left now was the truth. The drive back from Wilmington was silent and tense. I didn't turn on the radio. The USB drive sat on the passenger seat, a tiny black rectangle that felt as heavy as a bomb. I drove straight to a secure location Nora had arranged, a nondescript apartment miles away from Fayetteville, paid for in cash under a false name. It was our temporary command center. Nora was waiting, her face grim, a fresh pot of coffee brewing. "Did you get it?" she asked, no pleasantries needed. I simply held up the drive. She plugged it into a sandboxed, air-gapped laptop, a machine completely disconnected from any network. We were about to open Pandora's box, and we had no idea what demons were about to fly out. The drive mounted, revealing a list of neatly organized folders. My breath hitched. This wasn't the chaotic mess of a desperate amateur. This was the work of a meticulous planner. The first folder was labeled Meridian. Inside was Ethan's entire shadow world. Scanned copies of fraudulent defense contracts with falsified signatures, routing numbers for offshore accounts, detailed ledgers outlining millions of dollars being siphoned off from projects meant to provide body armor and equipment for troops overseas. He wasn't just stealing, he was stealing from his brothers and sisters in arms. A knot of disgust tightened in my stomach. Then we found the email archives, a thread between Ethan and Major Collins. My blood ran cold as I read Collins's words on the screen. "The sister is becoming a problem. She's too much like the old man, always digging." Ethan's reply was chillingly casual. "I'll handle my sister. You just make sure the official report is clean." Collins's final email was a promise. "Consider the nuisance handled." There it was. The conspiracy spelled out in black and white. But the worst was yet to come. One folder stood out, its name in all caps, encrypted with a password I knew instinctively. My mother's birthday. Special materials. My hand trembled as I typed it in. The folder opened. It wasn't just a plan. It was a military-grade operational blueprint for my murder. There were satellite images of my apartment complex, Detailed schematics of my car's make and model with a red X marking the optimal placement for a C4 explosive charge on the fuel tank. There was a log of my daily movements, my trips to the gym, the grocery store, my route to and from Fort Bragg, all tracked with terrifying precision. This wasn't a crime of passion born of jealousy. This was a cold, calculated execution. And then Nora clicked on an audio file. Ethan's voice filled the small room, stripped of its usual whining tone, replaced by something flat and reptilian. "Just make it a big enough blast to look like an accident," he said to an unknown person on the other end of the line. "No traces? She just needs to disappear." I felt the blood drain from my face. I could hear the dispassionate tone, the complete lack of humanity. This was the voice of a monster my family had created, nurtured, and protected. But the true heart of his darkness, the absolute depth of his depravity, was in the final folder. It was labeled Plan B. It was a psyop, a complete psychological operations campaign designed to utterly destroy me in the event the assassination failed. I felt a wave of nausea as I scrolled through the documents. There were forged medical reports, backdated over a year, detailing fabricated sessions with an army psychologist, diagnosing me with paranoid delusions and chronic instability. There were handwritten notes in what looked terrifyingly like Margaret's handwriting, listing my psychological vulnerabilities, my grief over my mother's death, my complicated relationship with my father, my intense professional ambition. All of it was weaponized, twisted into evidence of a broken mind. Collins was listed as the handler for this phase, tasked with planting these documents and discrediting any claims I might make. They hadn't just wanted to kill my body. They wanted to obliterate my soul. They wanted to erase my honor, my career, my sanity, my very truth. Ensuring that Captain Julia Stone would be remembered, if at all, as a tragic, crazy woman who simply lost her way. I looked at Nora. Her face was pale, her jaw set in a line of pure fury. I expected to feel broken, to shatter into a million pieces. But I didn't. The shock, the horror, the nausea, it all burned away, leaving behind something hard and clear and cold. It was the icy calm that comes before a battle. "They want a war, Nora," I said, my voice steady. "They're going to get one." We spent the next 6 hours huddled over the laptop, not as victims, but as strategists. We weren't planning revenge, we were planning a counteroffensive. We codenamed it Operation Exposure. It would be a two-pronged assault. The first prong, information warfare. Nora identified a legendary investigative journalist, a man my father had respected, known for his integrity and his refusal to back down from powerful people. We would compile a carefully curated evidence package, the money trail, the emails, the audio file, and send it to him anonymously. Time to be released exactly when we launched our second attack. The second prong was the kill shot. I'd discovered that in 2 weeks, the annual Veterans Solidarity Gala was being held in Fayetteville. It was a major event, attended by high-ranking officers and defense contractors. And this year's keynote speaker, a rising star in the community, was none other than Ethan Vance. He was going to stand on a stage and speak about honor and integrity. He was going to stand in my territory, in the heart of the world I had given my life to. He had chosen the battlefield. If you believe that truth, no matter how deeply it's buried, always deserves to see the light of day, hit that like button. And if you're ready to see a bully get exactly what they deserve, comment, set the stage below. We worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury. The plan was audacious, risky, and had 100 ways it could go wrong. But as I looked at the flowchart we had mapped out on a whiteboard, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. I walked into the small bathroom and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The haunted, exhausted woman from the past few weeks was gone. In her place stood a soldier, an intelligence officer, a warrior. My father used to say, "The best way to win a war is to choose your own battlefield." Ethan, I thought, my eyes locking with my own reflection, you chose the wrong one. The final 24 hours before the gala were a blur of controlled, purposeful tension. Our small anonymous apartment transformed into a tactical operations center. Nora, hunched over her glowing laptop screens, was the mission commander, the eye in the sky. I was the operative on the ground, the tip of the spear. The air was thick with a silence broken only by the frantic clicking of Nora's keys and our own deep, measured breaths. Every detail had to be perfect. One mistake, one technical glitch, one moment of hesitation, and the entire operation would collapse, taking me with it. We ran diagnostics on the tech for the 10th time. A micro camera, no bigger than a shirt button, was seamlessly integrated into the front of my dress uniform jacket. A tiny earpiece, flesh-toned and nearly invisible, would be my direct line to Nora. She had already breached the event hall's network, mapping their audiovisual systems. With a few keystrokes from this apartment, she could hijack every screen and speaker in that ballroom. I have control of the main projector feed, she confirmed, her eyes darting between lines of code. When you give the signal, I can switch the input to my encrypted stream in less than half a second. They won't know what hit them. And the package for the journalist? I asked, my voice low. Sent and confirmed, she replied without looking up. It's sitting in David Morrison's inbox, locked with a time-release decryption key. It will open automatically at 19:30 hours, exactly 15 minutes after Ethan is scheduled to begin his speech. By the time our show is over, the national news cycle will already be on fire. Everything was in place, all the pieces were on the board, and a cold, sharp-edged fear began to settle in my stomach. This was real. The moment I stepped into that ballroom, there was no turning back. As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a name I never expected to see again. Dad! My heart seized in my chest. Nora glanced at me, her expression questioning. I shook my head slightly and picked up the phone, my hand unsteady. I hesitated for a long moment, then accepted the call. His voice came through, and it was the sound of a man utterly broken. It was thin, tired, and pleading. Julia, he began, Your mother told me what you're planning. She said you're going to try and ruin Ethan. I stood there, speechless. My mother? He had called Margaret my mother. Please, he begged, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. Don't do this. Whatever you think he did, he's still your brother. He's family. If you destroy him, what's left of this family? The air was knocked from my lungs. It was the final, most devastating betrayal. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. He knew on some level what Ethan had done. He had seen the evidence of his son's character for years. But when forced to choose, he chose the lie. He chose to sacrifice his own daughter on the altar of a broken, toxic definition of family. He was asking me to be the good soldier and fall on my sword to protect the man who tried to murder me. Dad, I said, my voice trembling but my words firm. I am doing what you always taught me to do. I am defending my honor. I paused, the next words feeling like broken glass in my throat. I'm sorry. I ended the call before he could reply, before I could break. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone slipping from my fingers. A single, hot tear rolled down my cheek, then another. It wasn't a storm of grief, but a quiet final mourning for the father I thought I had, for the family that was never real. That was the last punch, the one that hurt the most. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair, my Army service uniform hanging from the closet door, perfectly pressed. The dark blue jacket, the gold buttons gleaming in the dim light. I thought about the day I took my oath at West Point, my hand raised, pledging to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I never imagined the domestic enemy would share my last name and eat at my dinner table. My father used to keep a small, worn Bible on his nightstand. He wasn't a deeply religious man, but there was one passage he'd underlined, one he'd quote when talking about facing adversity. I found it online, the words glowing on my phone's screen. Ephesians 6:11. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. I wasn't a believer in the traditional sense, but as a warrior, I understood the metaphor. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every soldier, every person who had ever been silenced, gaslighted, and buried by a corrupt system. My armor wasn't made of steel, but of truth. My shield was my integrity. My sword was the evidence on that USB drive. The first rays of dawn crept through the blinds, painting gray stripes across the room. It was time. I stood and began to dress, each movement deliberate, a ritual. The crisp white shirt, the black tie, the dark blue jacket. I pinned each ribbon, each badge to my chest. The Army Service ribbon, the National Defense Service Medal, the Parachutist badge. Each one was a reminder of what I had earned, what I had bled for, what they had tried to take from me. I slipped the earpiece into my ear. It was silent, waiting. Nora looked up from her computer. "Final comms check. You ready, Jay?" she asked, her voice a comforting presence in my ear. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But it was overshadowed by something stronger. The focused, unwavering calm of an intelligence officer on a mission. This uniform wasn't just an outfit. It was the armor of God. It was my father's true legacy. It was me. "More than ready," I replied, my voice steady. "Phoenix is in flight." And I walked out the door, toward the last battlefield I ever wanted, but the only one that mattered. I walked into the grand ballroom of the Fayetteville Convention Center, feeling strangely calm. The room was a glittering sea of military prestige and corporate power. Generals with chests full of ribbons chatted with defense contractors in tailored suits. The air hummed with polite conversation and the clinking of wine glasses. I was in full Army service uniform, the dark blue fabric a second skin, a suit of armor. I moved through the crowd with a quiet confidence, nodding to a few familiar faces, my expression unreadable. Across the room, I saw him. Ethan was the center of a laughing, adoring circle, holding a glass of champagne, looking every bit the charismatic young CEO. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive tuxedo, his smile wide and predatory. He caught my eye over the shoulder of a two-star general. For a fraction of a second, a smirk of pure, arrogant triumph flashed across his face. He thought I was here to surrender, to beg, to make a scene. He thought he had already won. Nearby, I spotted Major Collins, looking stiff and important. He gave me a sharp, warning glare, a silent command to behave myself. I ignored them both. My mission was singular. I found a position near the back wall, a perfect vantage point with a clear view of the stage and the 3 enormous projection screens behind it. I subtly touched my earpiece. "Comms check," I whispered, my lips barely moving. "Loud and clear, Jay." Nora's voice instantly replied in my ear. "The system is ours. I'm a ghost in their machine. Ready when you are." "Standing by," I breathed, my eyes fixed on the stage. A few minutes later, the master of ceremonies, a retired colonel with a booming voice, introduced the keynote speaker. A man of vision, a true patriot dedicated to the safety of our soldiers. Mr. Ethan Vance. The room erupted in applause. Ethan strode onto the stage, soaking in the adoration, waving to the crowd like a conquering hero. He stepped up to the podium, the spotlight catching the sheen of his silk lapels. He looked powerful, untouchable, the very picture of success. He cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice smooth and practiced. "Honor," he began, letting the word resonate in the microphone. "Integrity." He spoke about Meridian Tactical's unwavering commitment to the American warfighter, about the sacred trust between the soldiers on the front lines and the industries that support them. Each word he uttered was a profanity, a desecration of the uniform I was wearing. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, lecturing the sheep on the virtues of vegetarianism. He leaned into the microphone, his expression earnest. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to one simple, unshakable principle: integrity. That was the cue. I pressed the button on the microtransmitter in my pocket. "Now, Nora," I whispered. "Hit it now." The 3 massive screens behind Ethan flickered. The sleek Meridian Tactical logo vanished, replaced by a stark, black screen with simple white text. Audio file, Project Stone. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Ethan paused, a flicker of confusion on his face. And then, his own voice, cold, reptilian, and utterly devoid of compassion, blasted through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system, echoing from every corner. Just make it a big enough blast to look like an accident, no traces, she just needs to disappear. The audio looped, playing again. No traces, she just needs to disappear. A dead, suffocating silence fell over the room. 200 people held their breath in unison. On stage, the blood drained from Ethan's face. He looked like he'd been shot. The screens behind him changed again, now displaying a rapid-fire slideshow of evidence. Scanned copies of the fraudulent contracts, the signatures a perfect match to the one on his driver's license, bank statements from the Cayman Islands showing millions of dollars in deposits. The email exchange with Major Collins, their words damning them in crisp digital text. The silence in the room broke. A low murmur started, then grew into a wave of shocked, angry whispers. People were standing up, pointing at the screens, then at the man on the stage. Ethan stood frozen at the podium, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. His arrogant self-assurance had completely evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified shell of a man. He stumbled back from the podium, shaking his head, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at the evidence of his own crimes projected 40 feet high behind him. At that precise moment, the main doors of the ballroom burst open. FBI, nobody move! Agents in dark blue jackets, weapons drawn, poured into the room, followed by uniformed CID investigators, the real ones this time. They moved with swift, practiced efficiency. 2 agents swarmed the stage. "Ethan Vance," one of them yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and federal fraud." Ethan didn't resist. He just crumpled, his legs giving out from under him as they pulled his hands behind his back and slapped the cuffs on. From the front row, a woman's shriek tore through the air. Margaret. She was on her feet, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. I saw Collins, his face as white as a sheet, trying to slip out a side exit. He didn't make it 5 feet before 2 CID agents intercepted him, blocking his path. His career, his life, was over. And in the middle of it all, I stood perfectly still. My heart was pounding, but my body was calm. I was a statue in the eye of a hurricane I had created. My war was over. I had faced the enemy on my own terms, on my own battlefield. Justice hadn't been found in a quiet, sterile courtroom. It had been delivered, loud and clear and undeniable, under the bright lights of a stage, for the whole world to see. Amidst the chaos of flashing cameras and shouting agents, my eyes scanned the crowd and found my father. He was standing near the back, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. Our eyes met across the room. I didn't see pride in his gaze. I didn't see relief. I just saw the wreckage of a man who had lost everything. In that moment, I understood. My victory was his, and Margaret's and Ethan's final, absolute ruin. The brief, sharp thrill of triumph faded, replaced by the heavy aftershock of loss. The aftermath of the gala was a media firestorm. The story was everywhere. CNN, Fox News, The Washington Post. They called me a hero, a courageous whistleblower. Captain Julia Stone, the officer who exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud ring and a murder plot that reached into the highest levels of the military-industrial complex. The FBI's investigation widened, a net that caught a dozen more corrupt officers and executives. Meridian Tactical imploded, its assets frozen, its name becoming a byword for corruption. Major Collins was arrested, his career ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, humiliating click of handcuffs. I was vindicated. I was celebrated. And I had never felt more empty. Victory, it turned out, had the bitter taste of ashes. Every news report, every congratulatory call from a former colleague felt hollow. I had won the war, but in doing so, I had burned my entire world to the ground. A week later, my father called. He and Margaret wanted to see me. I knew I shouldn't go, that there was nothing left to say, but some broken, hopeful part of me, the part that was still a 10-year-old girl who missed her mom, agreed. We met at a small independent coffee shop halfway between Fayetteville and Wilmington. It was a neutral ground, a sterile environment for the final autopsy of our family. The air inside was thick with the smell of roasting coffee beans and a grief so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Margaret's face was puffy and swollen, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked older, smaller, all the fight gone out of her. My father just looked gray, as if all the color had been drained from his world. Margaret started, her voice a pathetic, trembling whisper. "Julia, please," she sobbed, reaching a hand across the table, which I did not take. "You have to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. You can retract your statement. Ethan. My boy. His life is over. You have to save him." I just stared at her, my expression a blank wall. The sheer delusional audacity of her request was breathtaking. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or understanding. She was asking me to set myself on fire to keep her son warm. I said nothing. My silence was its own answer. Then I turned to my father. This was the only voice that mattered. I waited for him to say he was sorry, to say he was proud, to say he finally understood. To choose me. He stared out the cafe window at the passing traffic, his profile etched with a pain that was almost unbearable to watch. When he finally spoke, his voice was cracked and broken. "I am so proud of your courage, Julia. You did what you thought was right." He paused, and my heart foolishly leaped with a flicker of hope. But then he continued. "But Margaret is my wife. Ethan is her son." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes swimming with helpless tears. "You've put me in an impossible position. This family, it's destroyed." And there it was. Not an apology. Not a validation. Just a lament for his own impossible situation. He didn't see me as his daughter who had almost been murdered. He saw me as a problem that had complicated his life. In his moment of truth, when given a clear choice between right and wrong, between his innocent daughter and his guilty wife, he chose the cowardly comfort of the middle ground. And in doing so, he made his final choice. A strange calm settled over me. The last embers of hope for a father's love died, and in their place was the cold, clean clarity of acceptance. "I didn't ask you to choose, Dad," I said, my voice unnervingly steady. "I only ever asked you to choose the truth. And you couldn't." I loved him, I realized, but I loved the man I thought he was, the colonel who played simple man and spoke of honor. That man was gone, or perhaps he had never really existed. "I love you," I continued, "but I cannot be a part of this anymore." I pushed my chair back and stood up. The finality of the moment hung in the air. This was the point of no return. "This is the last time we'll speak," I said, looking from his shattered face to Margaret's tear-streaked one. "I wish you both luck." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. I made it to my car, closed the door, and only then did I allow myself to break. The sobs came in great, heaving waves, a deep, primal grief for the family I never had, and the father I had just lost forever. The following week, I was summoned to the new battalion commander's office at Fort Bragg. Colonel Harris was a woman I respected, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude. My record had been cleared, my security clearance reinstated. The cloud of suspicion was gone. "Captain Stone," she said, her expression a mixture of admiration and regret. "On behalf of the United States Army, I want to apologize for how this system failed you. What you did took a kind of courage that we don't give out medals for." She leaned forward. "You can write your own ticket. Name it, and it's yours." I didn't hesitate. I had spent the last week in the ashes, and I knew what I needed to do. This wasn't about running away from the past. It was about shaping the future. "I want to transfer, ma'am," I said, my voice clear and strong. "To Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I want to be an instructor at the Army Intelligence Center. I want to help train the next generation of officers." This wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic redeployment. I was moving from one battlefield, a personal and bloody one, to a training center. From fighting the enemy to creating guardians. I wouldn't let my story be defined by trauma. I would turn it into a lesson, a shield for those who came after me. I would forge my own legacy, not from the name I inherited, but from the honor I had fought to defend. 6 months later. The sky over Fort Huachuca, Arizona, is a thing of impossible, endless blue. It's a vast empty canvas that makes you feel both infinitesimally small and infinitely free. I stand in front of a classroom of young lieutenants, their faces eager and sharp, the next generation of Army intelligence. I'm wearing my daily uniform now, the simple, practical Army combat uniform. The dark blue dress uniform, my armor from the gala, is hanging safely in my closet. It's duty done. There's a new kind of authority in my stance, a quiet confidence in my voice that wasn't there before. The brutal beauty of the Sonoran Desert has become my sanctuary, my place of healing. Its landscape is harsh, covered in thorns and things that bite, but it's also resilient, bursting with unexpected life. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. It's honest. Here, under this vast, open sky, the ghosts of North Carolina can't reach me. There is no past here, only the present and a wide open future. My transfer to the Intelligence Center of Excellence wasn't just a change of scenery. It was the beginning of my true life's work. I used my newfound notoriety to push through a new training curriculum. It's a mandatory course for all new Intel officers. I call it Operation Phoenix. I don't just teach them about signals intelligence or tactical interrogation. I teach them about the things that aren't in the field manuals. I teach them about ethics when the chain of command is compromised. I teach them about the courage to challenge the system you love when it goes wrong. And I teach them about the deadliest threats, the ones that come from within. My own case has become a core part of the course, presented as an anonymized case study. Case File Alpha 7. I walk them through the doctored reports, the psychological manipulation, the web of corruption. I teach them how to spot the red flags of a cover-up, how to counter gaslighting from a superior officer, and the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the most honorable action a soldier can take is to break a rule to protect the truth. I am taking the worst experience of my life and forging it into a shield for them. The scars I carry are now the map I use to guide them to safety. One afternoon, a letter arrives in my base mailbox. The envelope is standard federal prison issue. The return address is from a penitentiary in West Virginia. The sender, Ethan Vance. I hold the thin envelope in my hand, feeling its weight, which is next to nothing. I don't feel anger or fear or even curiosity. I just feel tired of it. That evening, as the sun begins its spectacular descent, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, I take a walk out into the desert. The air is warm and dry, smelling of dust and creosote. I find a quiet spot and stop, the letter still in my hand. I don't need to read it. Whatever words are inside, excuses, apologies, blame, pleas for forgiveness, they don't matter anymore. They are the last rattling chains of a past I've already broken free from. My peace is no longer contingent on his remorse. My healing does not require his participation. I take a single match from my pocket, the kind issued in MREs. I strike it, and the small flame dances to life in the fading light. I touch it to the corner of the envelope. It catches, curling, turning black at the edges. I hold it until the flame nears my fingertips. Then I let it drop to the sandy ground. I watch as the paper burns, the words within turning to gray, weightless ash. A gentle desert breeze picks them up and scatters them into the twilight, where they disappear without a trace. A final, profound sense of release settles over me. The past is not just forgiven, it is gone. The story ends here, on a simple, open road. I'm driving my new Jeep, the windows down, the warm desert wind whipping through my hair. I'm heading nowhere in particular, just enjoying the feeling of moving forward. I switch on the radio, scanning through the stations, and then I hear it, the familiar, gentle opening chords of a guitar. Mama told me, when I was young, come sit beside me, my only son. Simple Man. The song that once haunted me, the anthem of a legacy I thought I had to live up to. But this time, it doesn't bring a wave of sadness or a pang of loss. This time, I smile. A real, genuine smile that reaches my eyes. The song isn't his anymore. It's mine. It's become my own anthem. It's about finding satisfaction in a simple life lived with honor. It's about finding peace not in the approval of others, but in the truth you find for yourself. It's about understanding that a strong woman can face any storm, navigate any betrayal, and find her own damn sunrise on the other side. I had found my justice, not in the downfall of my enemies, but in my own rebirth, not in the ashes of my old life, but in the flight of the phoenix. And as the last notes of the song fade into the vast, silent beauty of the desert, I keep driving, heading toward the horizon, free. Thank you for walking with me on this journey, from the ashes of that roadside explosion to this new dawn in the desert. My war is over, but I know that for many of you, the battle is still being fought every day. In quiet kitchens, in tense boardrooms, and in the echo of painful memories. If my story has given you even a small measure of strength, please let your voice be heard. In the comments below, I want you to write 3 powerful words. My story matters. Let's create a chorus they can't ignore. Please hit the like button if you believe in the power of truth, and subscribe to this channel because this is a place where every survivor has a voice and every story matters. You are not alone.